I'm really excited about this version because they've taken the website to a whole new level, and it really, what I've found is it creates an ability for the common person to really dig into the data and see the story about their community, which is not really something we had before. We had a little bit of that function in the website before, you know, you throw a thick academic report at anyone and their eyes kind of glaze over unless they're in the business of grant writing or implementing community impact. So it's really fun, and I'm excited to show it to you. So ALICE, for those that are new, is asset limited, income constrained, employed, and it's a partnership between the states that are participating, which we're up to 22 now, and the United Way of Northern New Jersey, which is a combined United Way of a set of United Ways that merged about a decade ago. You know, and the exciting part about ALICE is everything from the ability to talk to policymakers in a different way to the ability to have good information about your community that you can use for grant writing or goal setting, assessing the work that you've done over time. You know, United Ways historically have done community assessment reports, and I've heard from several of our executive directors and CEOs that this will allow them to maybe not do a community assessment or maybe do a lighter version to just drill down into some specific things that might not show up in the ALICE report. So what I'm going to show you is a really good overview of what wages and work look like in your area and in the state of Idaho. I don't have policy recommendations at the end, and I think that's one of the nice things about ALICE is that it leaves the listener open to impression and where they're left with the story, and then you can have a conversation about where to go with it depending on the world the person walks in, because I've found that that conversation is very different depending on the walk of life the person comes from and what their view of the world is. And so ALICE gives us that sort of common place to start a conversation from, and I think it's really useful in that way. So I'm going to go ahead, and first thing I'll do is, if you're on the computer, I'm going to share the link to the Idaho report in the chat, and I'll watch the chat, and Mark will help me a little bit if there's questions along the way. But I'm going to do I'm going to aim for 20 minutes. And so I'd say if you have a burning question, go ahead and pop in with it while I'm on that page, and it'll be a little bit easier. And then we can try and save a little bit of time for bigger questions after I walk through the website. So let me go ahead. So for folks who are not on that link, it's unitedforalice.org/Idaho. And you can search United Way ALICE, and you can find the report as well. So let me share my screen. Did that come up?
Yes.
Okay. So on the website, just a quick overview. You have a set of tabs that will walk you through different components of the report. On the homepage, we see the overview for the state of Idaho. And one of the things that's important to really understand about ALICE is there's two pieces of the population that we're looking at here. And we're looking at the federal poverty line, or FPL definition, which, as many of you might know, is outdated. It's a formula from the 60s or 70s that hasn't been updated and really doesn't tell an accurate story of working families in any of our communities. And so ALICE was designed to combat that and really give us a definition of what it costs to live in every single part of the state. And so you'll see ALICE and poverty, and so the thing you want to do is put those together most of the time, and when you think about your community, because that'll give you sort of the full set and the full picture of people that are in financial hardship. At the top, you can see a link here to the full academic report. So it's not quite as meaty as it's been in other times, but there is narrative, and there are a few graphics in there that aren't on the website. You can see as well the data sheet in Excel. So if you want to use the data and manipulate it in your own way, you have that ability to pull that down. So the first graphic is looking at the, and a little bit of this will be Idaho, and then a few of the tabs I'll be able to drill down into your 5 northern Idaho counties that are served by the United Way of Northern Idaho, North Idaho. I'm sorry, Mark. And I know that some of you work in Washington, and that's just a different landing page, so I'm not going to show you any Washington data today. So you have, in the state of Idaho, the total poverty plus ALICE is 40%. And you can see on the chart here, we can look at that by household type. So looking at the state of Idaho, I can go, all households are showing, and if I hover over, let's see, here's Kootenai County with its 38%. So you're a little bit below the state average, versus if I click over into Shoshone County, you're a little bit above the state average at 47%. One of the cool features is the ability in a lot of these graphics to drill down. And so if I change this to single female headed families, you can see the map get a lot darker. You can see that all of a sudden in Kootenai County, 79% of the households are above the ALICE threshold, or below the ALICE threshold. So that's struggling to get by. If you look at Boundary County, 90% of the households are struggling to get by. And so it gives you the ability to drill down by age and by race and by household family type. And then at the bottom of this page, it shows us the percentages for each county in the state in a table form. It shows us ALICE and poverty over time. And I think this is an important graphic for people to think about. So you can see here that that actually poverty went down, but ALICE went up. And so there's a little bit of hope in that story. And that's that, people are moving up out of poverty or out of the federal poverty definition into the ALICE category. And so things are getting a little bit better for them, but they're still not in a place where they're saving money at the end of the month. They're still in a place where, one automobile breakdown or broken appliance could, force them to make a decision about feeding their family or possibly keeping their home. And I want to, put on the top of all of this, the context of COVID. And so, you're sitting here on the edge and all of a sudden you're on unemployment, or you're not able to get unemployment yet, and you're struggling with how to manage your family in a time where your income was already not sufficient to survive in your community, and then it gets a lot worse. And so, I want to give that caveat now to this whole conversation. This is a snapshot in time from 2018. And so our report today is 2 years old. It's the last time the complete data set is available. And so it's really important to put that into context, that this is the baseline before COVID. It's a really good representative story, and we'll be able to track this over time and see how we come out of this recession. And hopefully we'll do it a little bit better than we did coming out of the 2008, 2009 recession. You can kind of see that, I think the story here is that we didn't recover, working families didn't recover from the 2009 recession. And the challenge for community leaders and nonprofits and policymakers is to kind of lean in and see if there's a way that we can recover differently, so that we can have less, more families that are able to meet their needs and get by month to month. So it'll also show us those households in table in a bar graph form. And on almost all of the graphics in here, you can hover over and it'll show you the exact numbers of the percentages of the households and poverty, and give you data when you hover. No good project is complete without sponsors. And so we have a great sponsorship lineup, and actually, I think pretty heavily slanted towards Idaho, which is cool. The Idaho Community Foundation and the Idaho Nonprofit Center, Avista, Providence Healthcare, the Ford Family Foundation, the WaFed Bank put that money out for the Idaho part of the study. And then WSECU is the Washington State Employees Credit Union. So next I'll go over to the demographics tab, and this is where I'm gonna stop showing you statewide data for the most part now and show you the data for the 5 counties in northern Idaho. And you have the ability to turn different counties on and off and look at just one or look at all 5. And so I put in the counties here, so it's real simple. You can, there's a drop down. You can highlight whatever counties you want and add them to the picture. And so we'll start by looking at the Allison poverty population for families with children. And you can see that when there's a two-parent household that's married, that total number is under 20%. But when you have a single female-headed household, you're up at 80%. So double the statewide average of people in poverty and Alice families when it's a single female-headed household. And something that's interesting compared to a lot of the other counties in Washington and Oregon that I've been looking at, your single male-headed household is actually kind of close. And in most other communities, and you may see some difference looking just at one county, but most other communities, this is a fair bit lower. So something going on in this part of the community or this part of the country, these 5 counties where you see that even the male headed households having just as much discrepancy. And so maybe there's less wage gap for gender there, but maybe there's less opportunity for higher wage jobs as well. You can see this by age. And so one of the things that I say is it's kind of the bookend generations of our population that are struggling the most. And this is really common in any of the communities I've looked at so far, where families under 25, those households tend to be quite a bit above the state average. So we're running a little bit over 60%. And then the families that are 65 and older. And one of the new things about Alice, and I know some of you might work specifically with seniors, they've developed a senior survival budget as well. And so when we look at the budgets in a few minutes, you'll be able to see the survival line for families and a separate calculation for seniors. When we look at race, we can often see some discrepancy in the disaggregation of the data and bigger financial hardship of people of color. I think something that's interesting for me when I look at these 5 counties in Idaho that's a little bit different than other places I've looked at is that in most of the kind of the urban core areas, you'll see the Black and the Hispanic numbers pop up. And you'll see the 2 races pop up, and they'll be higher than the state average. In your case, and maybe because of the smaller size of the population, so you got a few hundred Black households in these 5 counties, or Asian households, and when you look at Black, it's not even 200. And this is in these 5 counties, just for context, there's 96,000 households. But what does pop up higher than the statewide average in your 5 counties is the Asian population. And so the Asian and the 2 race population both show some discrepancy compared to the statewide average based on race. So the next tab is the actual household budget tab. And I've also gone ahead and preloaded, make that go away. Well, I don't know why all these little information buttons will show you stuff and kind of learn more as you go along. I'm not sure why that one's not turning off, but I think I can still do this. So this is the budget comparison for those 5 selected counties. We can see the federal poverty threshold at $1,012. We can see a household survival budget for 1 adult. And you can see that things like healthcare and transportation and food and housing rise to the top. Similarly, in the senior budget, which is approaching $2,000. And there's a place where it totals them for us here in a minute. You can see the federal poverty for a family of 4, which is $2,092 in this 5-county area. And then see that budget where you start to see childcare and housing and transportation, healthcare really rising to the top. One of the cool features about this graphic is that you can churn on and off different pieces of the budget. So if healthcare were free in your community, you could bring down the cost of survival in your community. If you had excellent public transportation that got you everywhere in the rural area and people didn't have to maintain a car, or if, you know, not very many of these things are in our control locally, so I'll just use them as examples. But if, we turn back on healthcare and transportation, but we look at turning off childcare and having a subsidy for childcare in the community, then that price can come down as well. We can look at this by geography, and so we can click on each county and see kind of, so if we're in Kootenai County, we can see the cost that for that, family of 4 with 2 kids in childcare, you need to make a wage of $32.71 an hour. If you're a single senior, you need to be bringing in $12.73 an hour to get by on a survival budget. And that's no money for a movie at the end of the month. That's no money in savings, no car repair reserve. And then down at the bottom, it'll show us a table of all of those family types that we looked at in the budget above and the totals. Now, one of the cool features about this year is we now have the ability to create any family type we'd like to. So at the bottom, they've added the cost of adding 1 adult, adding 1 senior, adding an infant, or you can see if you add 1 school-age child to any of these budgets, you add an additional $10,681. So look a little bit at the labor force, and this is statewide, so it's not drilled down. But we can see that in Idaho, many jobs under $20 an hour, and even 60,000 jobs almost that are under $10 an hour, versus the numbers in the $20 to $40 an hour range are in the about 135,000 people making $20 to $30 an hour, and another 70,000 making $30 to $40 an hour. Here we can see what the labor force looks like in your 5 counties, and so I've gone ahead and put them in, and we can see that we have, so you have full-time salaried employees, full-time hourly employees, part-time hourly, part-time salary, you're unemployed, not in the labor force, and you're retired. Now, this is another place where the context of COVID really comes into play, because you had 3% unemployment, and that's people participating in the unemployment system back in 2018. And I would guess today you're in the 30s, if not approaching 30. You might be under it a little bit. Another thing that's important to understand here is what not in the labor force means. And that can be your gig workers, people working under the table or working out of home businesses that may or may not be sort of on the tax register, if you will. This also includes people that are on federal disability. And so that is one place that if we were to look at a trend over time since the recession in 2008 and 2009, that number of not in the labor force has grown exponentially. One of the other pieces that I'm hopeful about is with COVID, they've allowed gig workers, I believe in every state. Is that the case in Idaho, Mark, that gig workers can get unemployment under COVID?
I believe so, but I'm not certain.
Okay, and I'm pretty sure it is, but that will give us a better set of data eventually to look at some of this population, the people that are not even considered part-time, or a lot of people that run home businesses, they don't take themselves as an employee, and so that might not show. They may be in this category running a business that's not making income or not making profit and not paying any employees and sort of getting by on the cash flow of the business. We can see a little bit in this. This is our 5 selected counties again, and we can see how many people are working in different size firms. And so you can see that pretty large number of the families in this is number of jobs. So this is individuals, not households, are working in firms that are less than 20 or less than 50 people. Almost a little over half, if not 2/3 of this number. Versus 20,000 people working in firms over 500 employees. So I'm going to go back to the top here, and I'm going to show you two other quick things, and then we'll look at a detailed county profile, and I can stop and see what other questions you have. So this year they created something called the ALICE Essentials Index, and one of the things that a lot of people, a lot of companies and governments use to adjust pricing and adjust wage is the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index. And so this is a created picture of what the Consumer Price Index has done in comparison to ALICE population. And this is national. So this is not a state number. That we're working on trying to see if we can get this graphic for our region. The CPIs are not very specific to geography, and so the national story is the only one we have at the moment. But you can see that when you track, the ALICE cost of living increases compared to CPI are significantly higher. And, all the companies are looking at CPI as the growth in the economy and maybe or maybe not adjusting salaries based on that on a regular basis. And definitely less likely to have that happen with COVID and the financial implications for companies and nonprofits. And then we can also see that in index urban versus rural in the United States. And you can see that it's actually a little bit farther apart even. And the ALICE, the cost of living for ALICE families and poverty families over time is significantly higher. So we have 2 new data points that I won't go deep in, but I just want to show them to you. And so one of the things that they've been able to do now is do more mapping. And so we actually have the ability, if you're ever thinking, boy, I wonder how this, how childcare centers map to ALICE. That's something that we could probably do. It will cost some money, but there's an ability to generate different pictures from this data through the United Way of Northern New Jersey. And so they have mapped for us for free. They have mapped the proximity of libraries to ALICE families. And so you can see, let's go to Kootenai. So you can see that the ALICE families versus libraries and where they are. And so you can see kind of out in Harrison area, there's 1 library, and you got 36% threshold. It's a little bit more useful in more populated areas. So just as a thought there. And then they've also, and this I think has high context in the COVID conversation as well. And that's this is that they have mapped internet access compared to ALICE. And one of the most common lines I've heard from people that are trying to work from home right now that live out in the rural area is, rural broadband is a real thing and we need it because I can't hang. It's not possible to do Zoom meetings all day long on a dial-up connection or even on the standard Comcast internet connection. I had to get business class internet at my house so that I could work from home over the last several months. So we can see that, in Kootenai County, there's 38% of the households over the ALICE or below the ALICE threshold. When we look at that, we can see that 82.5% have internet access. It's a little bit lower, about 70 in Shoshone, 75. So you do pretty well. Benoit is your lowest, 68% internet access. And that can have big implications for families, especially if someone in the household is looking for a job and they don't have consistent internet access, or right now if they're expected to do their call center job at home or anything like that. And I will say, we'll just remind you that this is just internet access. This is not broadband. And so the broadband picture would be, particularly in rural areas, a little bit less hopeful. Okay, my last page is the county profile. And so you have the ability to generate a profile for an individual county. There is a tab here to print it. So I've done Kootenai County just as your most populated. You can see some of the numbers here. That unemployment rate that is really important to provide context every time you talk about Alice right now. We have a baseline, you know, and when we get the 2020 data in 2022, we'll have a story about what really happened with COVID in this time. You can see that your Kootenai County, you have 27%. Alice, a total of 38% that fall below the threshold. So I don't know what's going on here. This is the steepest line I've seen from 16 to 18 for Alice in the upward. And one thing I will say though is there's a lot of people here that have moved out of poverty because that poverty line is going down, but it's not as steep. And so I think there's things you might want to dig into and see if you can come up with some anecdotal or stories that can help validate this picture. I would imagine that there's some migration in and out, and that may be affecting the population as well. And so you have people coming in that are low income versus high income, you know, that's going to change this. And we don't really have a tool right now to see sort of the new population of people in an area with the growth. And I know that everything's growing in at least in the cities where you are. So we can see that same information just broken down by percentage and bar graph. You can see the types of households. So you can see that families with children and single people are sort of at or below the average, that the 65 and over population goes up above the average for the county. You can see that the same table of the budget. You can see the labor force picture for that county. And then this is actually my favorite part of the entire thing. The last piece to show you is the ability to drill down into additional geography. So, you know, we can look at Kootenai County and it has all these little subdivisions. And so these are zip code subdivisions. But we can also go and we can look at city subdivisions. So we can see Post Falls, Coeur d'Alene, Worley, Harrison, and Spirit Lake. We can also look at that by census designated places. Oh, sorry. So the one I just showed you were census tracts. And so census designated places is where the actual cities will be. And so here's the Post Falls, you know, 56% above the Alice threshold compared to 38 in the county. Coeur d'Alene, similarly, 56 compared to 38. And then at the bottom, it has the table for the percentages for all of the subdivisions that you've selected where I was just showing. So you can see all of the cities, and we just a quick scroll, and we can see that Worley City is your biggest opportunity, if you will, with 62% above the Alice threshold. Biggest opportunity by percentage. I don't want to, I don't want you to focus all of your work on 113 households either. But still important. So with that, I probably went over my allotted time, but I'll check in with Chris and Mark and see if there's some time for questions or a little bit of discussion before you move on to the next part of your agenda.
Yes, most definitely. We have time.
I have not seen any questions in the chat box, so if anybody has questions, feel free to hop in.
So Jim, maybe I'll throw one out here. You had mentioned that, the Alice report data is good for grant writing, goal setting, supplementing a community asset report. But what other ways can agencies use it, maybe in more of the day-to-day operations when they're, helping people navigate challenges and issues?
Right. Well, I think, one of the big examples of that is since we've started doing Alice in the Pacific Northwest, a large majority of our organizations have kind of flipped their work and articulated the focus on Alice. And so they might have been working on poverty, or they might have been working on early learning, or they might have been focused on health. But the financial stability work that they were doing seems to cross all of those worlds. And so, beginning to talk about Alice and tell the story of Alice in your work when you're out in the community, particularly with donors and decision makers, it can really raise the profile of the work that you're doing and kind of open people up to people don't always understand how big the problem is. And before I started doing Alice, I never thought about, in my town, one of the neighbors on one side of my house is struggling, right? Like almost every place in the country is that way. And when we talk about the federal poverty line, it's 10 to 15%, depending on where you live. And that's just not it's not a big enough number to have people go, oh man, we need to help these people. And so to me, that's the driving thing that everyone can do, is tell the story of Alice in their community. And, when you're sitting down with an individual, you can kind of, some organizations do financial planning or financial stability work. They're bringing different benefits to the table to help people with their monthly expenses, or bringing different products to them to help them out. And this will give you the ability to kind of build what the target goal should be for that individual family. What it costs to live in Coeur d'Alene, and the family's living in the wrong, the more expensive part of town and not making enough money. There's a lot of different ways you could think about that. And I think the challenge we have with this whole set is there's a lot that's not in control. We're not in control of in our local community. Even housing costs is really hard to affect at a citywide level, but you might be able to affect childcare costs. You might be able to get local government and business to partner to bring down the cost of childcare across your region by building a new center, or subsidizing the cost of childcare for some of these families. And I think that the ability to know where a family you're working with lies in the continuum can help you better serve them.
Jim, I also like the idea of mapping childcare. So my focus with United Way is the early learning piece of it. And I love the idea of mapping, because we have a map already of childcare deserts and where our childcares lie. So to be able to overlap that with where our Alice population is as well, I think is a wonderful tool potential to be able to really have that conversation and break it down to city specific. Because to be able to have that conversation at city levels with businesses or with city leaders for economic development and things like that, I think is just an eye opener of a tool to be able to use. So I think it has great potential, and that's exciting that potential may be there.
Right. Yeah. And if you're interested, we can talk to United Way in Northern New Jersey and see what it takes to get there, for sure. And I see a housing question, and I'm really glad you asked me that, because I realized when I saw it that I'm saying so much about COVID that I didn't bring the housing crisis into this to this picture when I was showing you the data. So 2 things to remember about housing, and that is, let me show the numbers here so we have it. So the housing costs that we were showing for 2 adults in childcare was $848. 2 adults with 2 children in childcare was $848. And I think, so this is a 2018 snapshot, and it does begin to show the housing crisis. But the thing to understand is that this is the average rent that people are paying. This doesn't mean there's a unit available for that cost. And so it's really an important thing to bring up to sort of caveat this data point, that just because that's the average doesn't mean that someone that can find units for that cost. And you're saying that many think it's $800 for a studio. So that would be, you know, the reality, you know, the anecdotal story or even the hard data point for your community about what it takes to obtain housing. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Jim, there looks like there's a question on, does this report information go through the end of 2018?
Yes. Yeah, so it's a complete data set through the end of 2018. And that's just the, you know, most of these pieces come from the American Community Survey, Housing and Urban Development data sets that are only updated on an every 2-year frequency. And so that's why you see a little bit the lag